chase the burr. That's when you're chasing the burr from one side to the other. And you've got to, yeah, that's what I call it, because you're moving the burr from one side to the other, till it's gone. And at one point, it's so that you can't really even see it or feel it, but you've got to make sure it's totally gone.
How do you move the burr from the outside of the shear back to the inside, and then from the inside to the outside?
Well, hopefully, eventually, it's going to break off.
I mean, do you do? Of course, you do your ride line and you create your burr.
Yeah.
And then with your polish, you're removing the burr on the outside. How would you remove it from the inside? Go back to your stone?
Yeah, you're going back to the stone, yeah. And then the final one, with me personally, I'll either cut a paper towel, or I will spread the blades apart so that they're closing and then opening, one of those two things. Because if you, and that's what I'm going to show you here. I don't think you can see it with this picture, but there's a little teeny tiny amount of burr here. I'm going to come in closer. Do you see that little bit there? Mm-hmm. Now that's something you might not be able to see with your naked eye. And if you push that back and forth and it's still hitting there, what's going to happen is when you close the scissor, that burr, can you see the two little nicks right here? It's going to nick your shear. Now remember the size of the hair? A hair could get in there. If there's slide cutting, that's going to make a difference. So, and there's different techniques, Dennis, on making sure that's done. And but me personally, I mean, I'm going to the doing the ride, and I'm going back to the outside and going back to the inside until it's all gone.
And then leg, whatever.
Yeah. And also, I'm a fan of a nail buffer, the really smooth nail buffer. Now I've worked with one of the factories and he wasn't too much of a fan of it, but I mean everybody has their own, what I'm trying to say is you're going to kind of develop your own technique on some of these things. It's sort of like doing math in school. I mean, as long as you get to the right answer, if you've got a little different technique getting to the right answer, but you've got to keep these rules. You've got to keep these rules. So if somebody shows you something to do in sharpening and it breaks these rules, it's not going to work. Does that make sense? And the way I sharpen today is not exactly like I sharpened this time last year. And next year, if you see me sharpen, may be a little different than I'm doing now. And that's part of what this whole thing is about, for us to grow. But if someone shows you something new, hold it up against those rules. Is it going to break any of the rules? And then try it a little while before you adopt it. And then, you can develop your own technique. Ride line or hone line. Casper calls it the hone line. Dennis and I call it the ride line. This is that flat surface. When you're sharpening, when you've got a pair of shears that's really sharp, you've got to have a hone line or ride line for those blades not to cut into each other, so they go over each other. That's what makes the shear really smooth. This is a picture of the ride line. This is what we show at the schools when we're doing cosmetology classes. We show them where that ride line is. For you, I'll show you the ride line. You see it's making this backwards J, and this should move here. And you can follow this all the way down. Now you can see little scratches on that ride. This was a brand new shear. So you're going to see teeny tiny scratches on that ride, but you see how it goes all the way down and it doesn't curve around at the tip. It stops right there. And here once again, the ride line is making a backwards J coming all the way down here. Now this is a microscopic view of the ride line, and what I want to show you here is the angle. Here's the hollow. Do you see how the grind marks are here? And the grind marks here on the ride? You see how they're a little bit, they're not at right, they're not in a straight line? And the reason why, if you take your hands, put them together like this, rub your fingers. You feel how that's rough? But if you tilt it a little bit, it's smoother. So that ride line, you don't want this, you want to have your blade tilt a little bit on your stone so that those grind marks are sliding over each other and it gives you a little bit more smoothness than if it's straight on. Does that make sense?
You say,
You know, you want to put the shear blade on the stone at 45 degrees.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Is that? Did you have a comment on that, or
You mean angle on the stone?
angled on the stone? But it's flat on the stone.
Flat on the stone.
It's flat on the stone, and it's
Like
hard.
this,
It's hard.
like
It's,
that.
Man, you got something new on me.
no, it's flat on the stone, but you don't want to have it, if the stone's here, and let's say you had a really wide stone, you would not want your shear right at right angles to that stone coming up and down. It's flat on the stone.
And most of the time you can't.
And most of the time you can, and that's why you don't really need a really wide stone. But you do want to have it, but if you had like a little 4.5 inch shear, you still want to have it, like you said, 45 degree, or I don't know if it needs to be 45, but it needs to be a little bit
Some
different.
angle so the pressure
So they don't line up.
Yeah,
to each other.
yeah. And that would be kind of the angle there. Now, you're going to hear people talk a lot about the twist to the shear, and you can see how this shadow, there's a twist to, you see how the shadow is? And the reason why is because the way that hollow is put in. The hollow is put in this angle, not straight from the back to the tip, but the angled end, where they're hollowed out the inside of the blade. And that creates a little bit of a twist to the blade. That's one of the reasons why you see the tip wipe out so easy, is because it's not as much of a hollow here as there is back here. And the only part of the shear that is actually flat is right here at the pivot. This is the only area that's flat. The rest of it's not flat. If you were to lay it flat on your stone, there's a little tiny, tiny, tiny amount of space between the back area of that blade and your stone. Only that cutting edge, only that right edge is touching. And that's why when you're moving it up and down on your water stone, you're only getting that ride line on that one side.
Start getting on the back side, it means the scissors wearing down, is getting old. Time to replace it.
Yeah, or you've got bad technique.
Bad technique, yeah.
Bad technique. One of the things I do when I'm training people and trying to make sure that they hold the right on the stone, because it's hard for me to look at somebody and tell, is I have them color it Sharpie all the way down one side and up the back, both sides, so that if there's red, if the red Sharpie's gone on the back, they kind of know maybe they're not holding it just right. Now the shear alignment are set. This is the part of sharpening I hate. And you can really, you have to be aware of it. Whether you decide you're going to be a person that tweaks the shears or align them or set them or whatever your terminology is, you can get by without doing that as long as you're aware of this. Because if the set is off, the alignment's off, you can sell them a new pair. But you've got to know, because otherwise you may sharpen them. And you may have them adjusted right, and you may have everything done right, but they don't cut. And you're like, why don't they cut? And so a novice sharpener, or like I used to do way back when I started out, because I didn't know anything about set when I started out back in 88, 89, I would just sharpen them again, make them sharper, make them blunter, change the angle. Sometimes if you make them a more blunter, you can make them cut, even if the set's off. Usually if shear's not cutting and you want to change the angle, going down more blunt, covers some of the covers up some sins there. But the alignment, does everybody in here understand what I'm talking about when I talk about the set or the alignment? I think might be a few new people in here that might not, but that's the way the two blades curve toward each other, and they've got to have that perfect curve so that they hit one place all the way down, because if one blade is skewed out, it's not going to cut. And that's one of the things that you do between the master and the journeyman, is the master sharpener has to know how to set that alignment. So you don't have to be able to set the alignment to be a wealthy, successful sharpener, but you do have to know how to do it if you want to be a master sharpener, and if you want to go in and know, hey, I can fix this. And if you take trade-ins, which is what we like to do, you can get shears that are out of alignment, they're trade-in, and then go home and fix them and then sell them to somebody. This is a picture from a factory where they're checking the alignment on a parallel bar. And they press down. That's something we make, when you go around to the centers, we can show you exactly how that's done if you're interested in that. And you're checking for the light under it and seeing how that blade is shaped. This is the only picture I could find on the internet where they're putting in the hollow and the shear. And it's not that good a picture, but you see how the stone is? We've taken, 3 tours, I think, of the Eichert factory, and I saw the machine in the corner, but they wouldn't let us watch it in operation. That's kind of the real secret, is what is that angle and exactly how that hollow is put in. Those that here 2 years ago, the Hanako scissors that were here at the NBTSG, they actually, they don't have a clamp. They by hand put the hollow in. They put some kind of a magical twist to it, you know. So it gets really secretive on some of this thing. But that is where, in my opinion, makes the difference between a shear that I can sharpen, make it work right, and a shear maybe that's coming from Pakistan or some other country where it's not made correctly, and no matter what I do, I can't make it cut right, is in the way that hollow is put in. Because that creates that twist, and that creates that correct curve, and that seems to be what separates not so much the steel, but is that workmanship that separates, in my opinion, a good pair of shears and one that I can't train on. So, but this, as I said, this is a picture I found on the internet of the factory. Now, there's different ways to correct alignment. This is actually a picture of the factory where they're hitting it. I'm of the bending persuasion. Casper, I know, is of the bending persuasion. He has a lot of technical reasons for it. My reason is I'm doing my sharpening in the salons, and I'm not about to let them see me pull out a hammer. I came back from the NSG one time, and I watched all these people do these alignments and everything, and I went back just as brave. Oh, I can do this. Somebody handed me a Joel Cobalt. Anybody knows anything about a Joel Cobalt knows exactly what happened. I had my little hammer.
Bending block. You don't want to see the bending block.
So that was. I went a number of years without attempting bending after that little fiasco, and I had to buy him a new Joel. But there's some shears that you just don't bend. Joel Cobalt is one of them. Some shears, all of our shears that have purple screws, or excuse me, amethyst screws on them, do not bend them.
Joel Cobalt you're talking about are the Joels with the little chicken on them?
Yeah.
Chicken on it, don't bend.
Yeah. It kind of inspired us to do the fish, our fish logo, on our shears. We use the fish logo because, well, number one, we're Christians, and that's kind of the symbol of Christians. And it's enough different that it doesn't offend people who aren't Christians. But also the fish is kind of a universal sign. I mean, fish doesn't know any boundaries or countries. It goes from one place to the other, and the symbolism of teach a man to fish. You can eat for a lifetime, and that's kind of been our philosophy with the sharpening and with our shears. But back to the alignment thing. But